Hi, I'm Lucy Mackintosh, a Senior Research Assistant from the University of Hertfordshire. Back in 2021, as part of my pathway to becoming a Fellow of Higher Education, I had to write a journal article which looked at how pedagogic theory can be used in practice. Due to the timing of this being just after the Covid-19 pandemic, I looked to focus on how the use of online learning during the pandemic affected compassion in teaching and how this then impacted student success and student satisfaction. Compassion in teaching can be seen as the ability to notice physical or social distress in others and take action to address it. Compassion has been widely researched as a very important aspect of teaching and how this can help improve student satisfaction and success. Compassion can be found in teaching through active listening, empathy, desire to help, inclusivity, understanding emotions, promoting silence, and creating a safe space. One example of a research study that looked at compassion in teaching is by Gilbert 2016. Students within the classroom were asked by the teacher to share their work, to pay attention to other members of the group, and to use eye contact and mimic their peers' vocalisations. The findings from this study, particularly the use of the eye contact, was extremely important, and students felt responsible for theirs and others' learning. This shows how these elements can cause a compassionate learning environment. Additionally, Cadell and Wild 2018 conducting a narrative review study with 24 interviews with academic staff. The focus of this was the use of kindness and collegiality within the classroom. This study found that teachers and students must have a good working relationship to help the learning be more effective. Additionally, ensuring compassionate learning environment showed a positive relationship with students, i.e. students receiving higher grades. This study really focused on the idea of having the relationship between the teacher and the student, such as a compassionate relationship, helped improve student learning. So these were some good examples of how compassion is extremely important within the learning environment to ensure student understanding, satisfaction and success. Other examples about impact of online learning was conducted by a study looking at COVID insights conducted by the Office for National Statistics. So this looked at how the transition during the pandemic from face-to-face teaching to online learning might have had on students and how this could affect their satisfaction and their success. So this looked at the style of teaching, student mental health, and then students' overall satisfaction with the online learning teaching environment. 65% of students experienced 0 hours of face-to-face contact with their teacher within a 7-day period prior. 1 in 5 of these students said that they had less than 1 hour of face-to-face contact. 53% of students surveyed were dissatisfied with their social experience and 29% dissatisfied with their academic experience. 44% of undergraduate level 5 and 6, so second and third year students, were satisfied with their experience compared to only 55% of level 4 students. So this shows how different year groups of an undergraduate cohort had experienced different levels of satisfaction and success due to online teaching. Furthermore, research has looked at the effect of online learning during the COVID-19 pandemic by interviewing 27 teachers whose English wasn't their first language. They found that there was a lack of interaction with their students, which strongly affected the teacher's own learning process. Teachers found an increase in anxiety and a decrease in motivation through teaching using an online learning environment only. So this goes to show how that with compassion, both the student and the teacher needs to be within the compassionate environment for the learning to be successful, and that not only were students impacted by the online learning environment, but so were teachers. Finally, this study looked at how compassion may have been adapted to work in an online teaching environment. So this looked at teaching through technology-enhanced learning with semi-structured interviews with health professionals regarding how compassion in education works in an online environment. There were concerns here about a lack of human interaction and also about digital poverty. So these healthcare professionals concluded that although you can learn through an online environment, and compassion can be sought by some students, the lack of a physical human interaction through online learning can make it harder to find compassion, but also some students don't have the technology or the ability or the money and finance to be able to benefit from an online teaching environment, whether they can't afford Wi-Fi to study at home or whether they don't know how to use it. And so there are barriers there that needed to be considered. So these studies just give an overview of how compassion, online learning and compassion in an online learning environment may impact both students and teachers. And this set up for me to be able to develop this article as part of my fellow. So the aim of my study was to be able to A, understand the importance of compassion in teaching for student success, B, how increased online teaching impacted the use of compassion, and then see how this relates to student satisfaction. So clearly we can see that compassion and learning environment does have an upward trend with student satisfaction and student success. So a student who is satisfied is more likely to succeed, and a compassionate environment is a great way of nurturing students into this success and into this satisfaction. So the next thing was to be able to look at how students found compassion to be within their online learning environments and how they felt this affected their satisfaction. I developed a measure by using a survey to look and evaluate how students were impacted by the pandemic with the transition from face-to-face to online learning, but also how they felt their compassionate learning environment was affected and how they were satisfied with this or not. The survey was completely anonymous and was available to all students within their undergraduate cohort, so students from 1st to 3rd year, so level 4 to level 6. The study did not need ethical consideration, as I was a visiting lecturer at the time, and so the survey fell under the protocol for reflective practitioner work. So the self-developed measure started off with a brief introduction just to let students know the aims of the study, how the data was going to be used, that it was not mandatory to complete the study, and that any answers they gave would not affect their course and any assignments they were giving and their grading. So it was really just to be able to kind of get from their perception, from what we've already seen with the use of compassion, online learning and student satisfaction, from their perception what they thought of this. The first 2 questions of the survey asked students to say what year group they came from. So the study looked only at undergraduate students, so from year 1 to year 3, with year 1 being known as level 4, year 2 level 5 and year 3 level 6. Year 3 is the final year of an undergraduate study, and so students in this year have the stress of writing a dissertation, and so the experience that they might have had with the transition to online learning may be greater than, let's say, a first year student. But obviously the needs and wants of each student in each year group does differ due to the demands of the course and also just the introduction of the course. So we asked that question because we thought it'd be interesting to see how the different perceptions of the move to online learning may affect different students' satisfaction based on their year. Students were also asked to record how many hours of contact learning, so face-to-face learning, that they were being offered during that year. The main part of the study was split into 2 and used Likert scales to measure students' opinions based on the following. So the first half looked at compassion, and so mentioned areas of compassionate learning as seen before, so the idea of creating a safe space, active listening, empathy, desire to help, inclusivity, understanding emotions and promotion of silence. So this was a clear way for students to be able to recognise whether their learning environment online was compassionate. And so they would rate on a scale, on a Likert scale, with the higher the number showing that these aspects of compassion were present in their teaching. Examples were also given so that students could really see familiarity between their experience and what we were trying to measure. The second part also used the Likert scale, but looked at measuring student satisfaction. And so they looked at the enjoyment of attending, how their learning had been affected by the use of online learning, and whether they felt that they were still getting what they were intending to get out of their learning. So the results. So this table shows how many students we had from each year group and by percentage. So the most responses to the survey, which was available online only, by the way, was from first year students. So 43.2% of the data was from first year. This second year students, only 15%, 15 students responded, and then third year, 10 students responded. And so overall, we've got quite a good mix of student representation, but with the first year is having more to say. And so we could look at this and wonder whether or not third year students found less of a change to their experience compared to first year, or whether third year students just weren't engaging as much because their environment had moved to online. This table shows the responses to the questions, how many hours of face-to-face teaching have you received this semester? And the range is from 0 hours of face-to-face teaching to 40. So 40 hours is respectively how much a student should have on average. So as you can see, most responses were between 0. So students were solely being taught online. The middle band around 20 hours, which shows a hybrid impact, so both online and face-to-face teaching to cover the contact time with their tutor, was also quite common in the percentage. But there was a very great variation, and this wasn't looked at between the year groups. And so that would be the next step, would be to see whether first year students had less face-to-face contact than third years. So in order to see whether or not the transition to online learning impacted compassion, and whether if it did impact the amount of compassion within the learning environment, how this had an effect on both student satisfaction and student success. So this scatter graph shows the relationship between compassion scores and student satisfaction. So although a correlation cannot show cause and effect, due to the trend of the data being on a positive upward skew, we can assume that students who experienced higher compassion scores, so showed that there was more compassion within their learning environment, or there was definitely elements of compassion in their learning environment, were more likely to have a higher enjoyment score. As you can see, it doesn't sit that closely to the line, but this was a significant impact effect. So as said, this used a Pearson product moment correlation coefficient using SPSS software, and found that this was a significant relationship between compassion scores and student satisfaction, with a significance of 0.009, so less than 0.01. And so we can find there that compassion definitely does increase student satisfaction within learning. So the Likert scale, to measure whether students were satisfied with their learning and their online learning, looked at from agreeing with a statement to disagree. And so neutral, so neither agree or disagree, was awarded a 0 in the marking. Anything agreed, so agree and strongly disagree, was given a positive 1 and 2, and anything below, so disagree and strongly disagree, a -1 and a -2. So this bar graph shows the overall scores for the satisfaction, so looking at how interactive online learning was, making friends, the learning environment, whether they felt they were getting anything from that, and their enjoyment. And so as you can see, only enjoyment and friends had a positive score. So this meant that most students felt that even though they're in an online learning environment, they scored this as they agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that they were able to make friends and that they were still enjoying their course. Unfortunately, the ability to interact in an online learning environment, the online learning environment itself, and being able to still learn in the online learning environment was all negative. So this suggests that most students scored disagree and strongly disagree with those elements, and so this was what was really lacking in the online learning environment. In particular, we can see that I feel that my learning has been affected by the use of online teaching, scored significantly low, and so this was the aspect that students felt was missing more, they disagreed with more. So students felt that there was no opportunities to interact with their peers outside of lessons, they didn't learn as well as an online setting, and that their learning had definitely been affected by the transition from face-to-face learning to online learning. And so this is quite a cause for concern moving forward in an online learning environment to ensure that students are getting the fulfillment they need from that. This scatter graph shows the relationship between hours of face-to-face teaching and compassionate scores. So again, we see that positive upward trend, that compassionate scores are high. When compassionate scores are higher, the amount of face-to-face hours is also higher, and so there we can see that compassion is mostly found in face-to-face learning than online learning. And so students who were receiving 100% online learning, which was the biggest response we saw before from the demographic question, that these students were also not experiencing a compassionate learning environment. Using the same Pearson correlation coefficient with that scatter graph, so the relationship between compassionate scores and amount of face-to-face learning was also significant. So there we were able to see that as online learning increased, compassion within the learning environment decreased, and that as lack of compassion increased, so a non-compassionate environment, so did the student satisfaction scores. And so we were able to conclude that in order to have a compassionate learning environment, there needed to be an increase in face-to-face contact, and that student satisfaction was also found on this. So then we looked at the enjoyment scores with hours. So, were students who were solely receiving learning online, were they still having the same enjoyment? And what we got back was no relationship at all. So as you can see there on the graph below, there is a varied amount of scores and data with nothing really kind of solidifying any relationship between hours of online learning and student enjoyment. So as I said before, so this correlation was not significant. And in the journal article I wrote, this was used as an appendix because obviously it doesn't kind of link or support what I was looking into, but I just found it interesting with all the other things being significant, would that also have an impact? So it really showed us that it was the lack of compassion within the online learning environment that affected student satisfaction and student success rather than the online learning environment itself. So what do we take away from this? As I've said multiple times, we can now see that compassion is really important for student success, and that an online learning environment doesn't always have this compassion. And so that would be the aim of the study. So as part of this, I wrote a long discussion as to what can we take away as educators, as teachers, as lecturers. How can we increase compassion in the online learning environment so that student satisfaction and student success doesn't decrease? And so active listening, so this is going back through the elements I said at the very beginning by Gilbert 2016. So the different things that make a compassionate learning environment that has been researched, used and supported by other research. And so teachers should ensure that on an online learning environment, They ask more open-ended questions. They reflect on others' feelings. They clarify what is being said. They summarise what is being heard, and they encourage the use of open-ended questions by other students. And this all shows how an active listening environment is being created. And so it's also beneficial for teachers to reflect on what students are saying, to ensure that they have understood correctly what the student has said, and also to show that to the student that they have been heard and understood. Empathy is a tricky thing to show, especially in an online learning environment. The use of camera by the teacher and the student speaking is a good way of showing that, because this allows for the same facial expressions to be used, the same body language, either open or closed, and gestures that can be visible on camera. And all of these elements show empathy. So mimicking a student and how they sit and their facial expression can show that you are being understanding to their emotions and their situation. And so this needs to be done with the camera on. Now, obviously, asking students to put their camera on is difficult, and not all students are in a position to do that or would like to do that. And so at least asking students when they are communicating with the class and with the teacher to put their camera on as well as their mic is a good way of being able to create that empathy. But sure, as long as the teacher has that on, the students are able to see the teacher, and the teacher can mimic what they believe to be body language and show an open body position to show that they are engaging with the class. Desire to help is another element of compassion, and again is a lot easier to create in the face-to-face environment. And so again, the use of cameras is a good way of being able to show the desire to help, because people are more inclined to help when they can see the person in need. Other ways though, which may be easier, is to create an environment that students can support other peers. So this can be by asking a student to answer a question if another student is struggling. So if you ask a question, a student goes to answer, or you choose a student to answer and they struggle, asking someone else to answer it and help that student by explaining how they came to that answer. Another good way of showing desire to help is by creating the breakout rooms, so allowing students in a much smaller environment to help each other to solve the task or complete a task, and that have that desire to help one another then. Inclusivity is something that we should all be ensuring anyway, but just to ensure in an online learning environment, because it is different, that students should have frequent communication with yourselves outside the learning environment still. So just because you're not being able to interact with students on a face-to-face basis, having an open office, so being able to telephone or email or have drop-in sessions to your office outside of the learning hours, is a good way that for students who need help, need support, or want to be included can come to you and get that. Other ways of doing it is to make sure that you're varying the tasks being used. So within the classroom, you may talk for a certain period of time and then ask students to complete a task. Same with online learning. So just because you're not there in person with the students, you can create the breakout rooms or pause, ask students to have a discussion, and just be a facilitator in all of that. Another way is again to encourage group work, which can be used within smaller class groups online, or the use of breakout rooms. Understanding emotions is a difficult thing to portray, a bit like empathy anyway, but on an online learning environment it's definitely heightened, and a good way to show understanding emotions is to have a self-reflection at the end of the teaching session. So asking the students to reflect on that session, so spending 5 minutes at the end to just say, go over what was achieved in the lesson, what were the aims and objectives, how they've been met, but also asking students how they felt they did. So just being able to understand that for some it's difficult, and even introducing other topics. So now Covid-19 is a bit more behind us, but there are other things going on. So in the UK we're in a cost of living crisis, so just allowing that time for students to reflect on other matters outside the classroom shows that you are understanding that there are other things in these students' lives other than the learning and the university course, and that they are just as important, and that you are also there as their tutor for the pastoral care that you can offer as well. Promoting silence. So the use of silence helps other students engage better. The awkwardness of a silence encourages students to feel more open to feel the silence, and then helps create this discussion. And the student can also feel compassionate to the teacher. So in a silence, they want to help. They have that desire to help, to fill the gap, to fill the silence, and answer the questions. In an online learning environment, it's incredibly hard to understand whether a silence is due to a technical fault on either end, or the bandwidth not responding. And so it's important to be able to say, to promote the silence, that is what you are doing. So phrases like, I'll give you some time to think, or I'll just wait for somebody to answer, lets the students know that you're promoting silence rather than there's been any technical issues. And finally, creating a safe space. It's really important that in an online environment, like you would in person, to create some rules and boundaries for students. So what are your expectations? Do you expect students to have their mics off unless they are talking? Do you expect them to have their cameras on? Do you want them to let you know why they haven't got their camera on? But also other things. So just reminding students that even though they're not in the room, they should be listening to other students. They should be engaging with the class. The online learning environment shouldn't be an excuse for students to attend but not actually be there. You know, camera and mic off, so they're in the call but they're not actually engaging. And so just setting out some rules and expectations that ensure that students can know that there's still confidentiality, there's trust, there's honesty, acceptance and empathy. So it's really important for students to know that they're not just talking into a screen, that there are people at the end of that, and these people are their friends and their tutor, and that there is this safe space for students to talk about what is going on and to learn. So this presentation has looked at how compassion is used in teaching every day, and how online learning due to the pandemic has impacted university classes and lectures, as well as obviously other areas of education. And then it looked at how compassion has been impacted by the use of online learning, with my measures showing how compassion has decreased in online learning, and this has had a negative impact on student satisfaction and success. And so for future research, I would suggest these two things, that future research should consider how ensuring a compassionate online learning environment can help improve student satisfaction. So using the previous elements that I've gone through, active listening, desire to help, creating a safe space, and some of the suggestions, using them and seeing the response you get from students. And secondly, asking students about that. So being transparent in an online learning environment, saying how you want to use active listening, or saying how you want to use creating a safe space, and get students' perceptions on this. So do they feel that works? Is that what they need? Or is there other elements of compassion that are falling through the cracks? And is there that need for that human interaction? Thank you for listening. If there are any questions you would like to ask, please feel free to email me with my email address displayed on the screen, or any comments you'll have, or any examples of how you've used compassion in an online learning environment would be great. Thank you.